insight. And so a great example of that is Chegg. When they first started in textbook rentals, most people said that rentals of books had been tried before, but it failed. And they failed to understand that the real insight that they had was books in general, rental doesn't work, but students who are spending $1,200 on books every single year have a real incentive to not buy all of those books, right? And then the other part was they also knew that textbooks that had highlighting and notes written into them were actually more valuable to some students than a clean textbook. And so this textbook model actually worked really well within the college market. And so those insights were quickly tested and discovered, and I think that's what really made it valuable to them. So we're looking for those types of entrepreneurs that have that kind of ambition, or looking at a large potential market with a unique insight that's non-consensus but right. Yep.
If you're in like a board member role, do you ever find yourself in a position where a decision has to be made that you have to decide like what's in the best interest of the shareholders like as a whole versus like what's in the best interest of your firm?
I don't think I've ever had that case. I would say 99% of the time we're very much aligned with the entrepreneur. Because as a small fund, we're getting in early, and then we tend to get diluted over the next follow-on financing.
Right.
So we're much more aligned with the entrepreneur than sort of general shareholders. I think the only place where I would caution young entrepreneurs is if you take money in at a high valuation, right? And you get to the end of the road, and let's say your company is not executed and you have to sell the company. And there's this option for the company to provide all the money back to its shareholders and then a little bit more, and you have to go work for non-sexy company A, or you get less than the money back from company B, and maybe their offer is a little bit better because you get actually some money back yourself. And and then the third option is just give you money back, right? Think about that. Think about that scenario when you're raising a large round of financing. Because I think if you're an entrepreneur that really understands the contract that you got into when you received financing from your VC, your obligation is actually to the shareholders. You should take non-attractive job A that pays market prices. As long as it's paying you market prices, you have to stay 2 years, but your shareholders now get more than their money back. But in a case like that, if the entrepreneur is absolutely adamant that they don't want to do that, I'm not going to force them to, but I know what the right answer is, right? And that's the only case that I've seen where, I don't feel like I was exactly on the same side as the entrepreneur, but at the end of the day, we're not going to force them to do something that they don't really want to do.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about valuations that we're in the investment climate.
Valuations in this climate?
Yeah.
I think they're high. I think people don't appreciate how that impacts them, right? So a lot of entrepreneurs I'm seeing are stoked that they're getting a $10, $15 million valuation for a product that barely exists, no customer traction. I don't think that people really understand what that means for their Series A, Series B financing. You better have $5 to $10 million in revenues a year by the time you raise your next round of financing. You better not run out of a single cent of cash, because you're screwed. You're either going to have a down round, or you're going to have no one's going to want to touch it. right? Because the next round of financing, it's been easier for my portfolio companies that raise their first round of financing at a low valuation to raise their next round of financing because the VCs will actually take it seriously as a Series A or Series B financing. But if you raise that, 10, 20 post, and you go out for your next round of financing and you're sort of a Series A investment at that point, and you're competing against another company that has, $600,000 in booked revenues last quarter, and their post, the post of the previous round was $5 million, who do you think they're going to be talking to?
Well, but you're framing, obviously you're more familiar with this than I am, but you're framing it sort of from the startup's point of view, they better have these things. But from what I've seen, like reading news, I'm not in the field, it seems much more like VCs, the VC industry is trying to push more money into startups than really.
Probably, right? So if you have a huge fund, if you have a $500 million fund, then you're going to want to put in $10 million into a company, $5 to $10 million into a company. But it's your responsibility as an entrepreneur to say, pound sand, I don't need that money, right? If you're saying, if you have no control over your VCs and they're telling you how much to raise, you've already lost. You've already lost. Right? Like, the best company that I had, actually, one of our best companies was on the 6th floor here, Demand Force. They raised very little capital and got to, double-digit millions in annualized run rate. And it's just, everyone says SaaS businesses need a lot of money to be poured into it in order to be successful. Guess what? It's not true. So, I think capital efficient businesses are both advantageous to the entrepreneur because you get a lot less dilution, you don't have to raise as much money, but it also provides discipline because it comes back to that concept of you don't hedge, you focus. You aren't wasting your time on stupid experiments. You're not hiring a CMO and a COO when you don't need one. You aren't doing things that you don't need to do. You're absolutely focusing on the minimum set of features that you need to develop in order to attract the customers that you need. And the minute that you sort of start spending more than you need, that's the point at which, when you stop making trade-offs, that's the point at which I think startups start to fail. And so raising more money than you need, valuations that are too high, I think that's more of a lack of discipline on the top part of the entrepreneurs. And we've actually encouraged some of our startups not to raise at a high valuation. I had one company that was offered, it was like a $45 million valuation. We kind of got together and laughed about it at the end of the day. And, they recognized that if they raised at that valuation, they were kind of limiting their options, not only for exit, right? Because if you're raising at a $45 million valuation, you're making a bet that you're going to be able to exit at least $150 million. And they weren't positive about that necessarily. We wanted to maintain our exit optionality, and we want to have the ability to execute.
Well, if an entrepreneur takes money from VCs and cannot generate a return on investment, how does it affect the chances of getting a second shot with a second idea?
We have very short memory spans. I don't think that impacts it as much as, what did you learn from that experience? Right? You should have a clear sense of what did that teach you. And I think that's the beauty of Silicon Valley, is that it's not seen as a failure, it's seen as sort of, learning experience, and people are very forgiving about it. Yep.
Salaries, with all that being said, an entrepreneur taking a salary when he or she goes to raise a round, what's respectable?
So that was interesting. It was, I found that success is pretty highly correlated with founders taking fairly low salaries. And I've had surreal discussions with some of my CEOs telling them that I didn't want them to starve and that maybe they should give themselves a raise. Those are the companies that do the best. And I don't even know why, but I think part of it is that it also creates a cap on what the employees will ask for. And then it forces the CEO to have a really good narrative of their company. And so it's just sort of, it's a forcing function in a lot of ways. Now, I don't believe in people starving. I believe in them living in safe neighborhoods and, not having to eat ramen all the time. And so I believe in sort of comfort, but hunger to some extent, right? And so it's sort of, even when founders cash out, sort of a principle that we like to use is sort of, don't make it a life-changing amount. Make it so that you can fund your kids' 529 plan and pay off part of that mortgage, but if it's an amount that's going to make you stop working, then don't take that. Yeah.
So you said low salaries, I guess, correlates to like better performance of the company. What? Can you be more specific? So like in San Francisco,
It totally depends,
that's one
right?
number,
Well, it
New York,
depends.
that's another
So,
number.
we've had people who are successful CEOs of venture-backed companies that had an IPO in the past, and so they have, a certain cachet about them, and so they may actually, if you hire in that CEO, if we're talking about founder salaries, it's a little bit different because you have a high equity percentage, and so you should be willing to take a fairly low salary.
Well, and I agree, but what is fairly low?
It depends. It totally depends.
What about in
right?
San Francisco?
So it's San Francisco. Do you have kids?
No.
Right. So if you're talking about yourself
I have a
personally,
dog.
right? Like, so it totally depends. Like I have CEOs who have whole families
Right.
whose kids go to school. I'm not going to ask them to change their lifestyle, right? And I don't want their wives like yelling at them or their husbands like complaining about the fact that whatever, they no longer have cable TV. That's actually, I hardly ever really look at the compensation of the CEO or the founders. And I found actually that I've never been surprised. It's something that you could just tell from people. It's most of the time pre-Series A, I'm surprised if it's over $100,000.
I just moved here and I'm trying to figure out like once I collect how much to pay myself.
I would pay yourself,
I don't
if you're a
think
founder
anywhere
of a
near
company,
$100,000.
if you're
But I
a
don't-
founder of a company, I would pay yourself as little as possible because that is that's your cash flow, right?
Right. I think it was more so how much do I need to like survive here was the question.
Well, I mean, I don't know, like, do you want to live in the Mission or do you want to live in Snowy Valley?
Excelsior.
I'm paying $550 a month here right now, but I don't think that's going to be able to continue.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of from a VC's perspective, we want you to have a roof over your head, right? And, you should be able to buy food at Whole Foods if you want to.
So you were talking about like what happens when you're bringing in a CEO. How often do you guys do that, and like in what cases?
And at what stage?
Yeah.
That happens more often after Series A or Series B, I've noticed.
Okay.
We like to see longevity in the founders, though. A lot of times, they'll just be like, we don't have like the biz dev. We're more of a product person, and this is really an operations kind of company, and so we need to bring in someone either alongside me or above me. If it's going to be like the world's most awesome person, then I'm totally fine having them be a CEO. It's usually not an ego-driven thing at all, and I've actually hardly ever had a contentious situation. It's just been sort of, in one case we had like a few co-founders, and I actually asked each one of them who was the CEO, and no one really raised their hand, and so I said, I can't hire one, right? And so, usually that happens after Series A. When we get involved at Series